panel discussion now, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So can we'll just take about a couple of minutes to really set up. Can I request the panelists to come up? So we have Rizio, please can we have you there? Amitabh Thakur, Raghu, yes I can see Raghu. Dr. Chatterjee, please. Yes. Siva Nagarajan, I can see him before I saw him. Yes, perfect. And then of course, Wilfred, please. But first and foremost, I would like to start with Dr. Chatterjee and try to understand, like, what is the role of the government in whatever Stuart is actually saying? What is going to be the importance of government in really achieving the next set of evolutionary processes or things that you're talking about?
I think the primary role of government has to be creating an enabling atmosphere. There are two ways government goes about looking at this whole new space altogether. Very exciting space, I have to say, Professor Hart, great presentation, ignited our minds completely. One, of course, is the regulatory process. And you put that in your very first quadrant. And for a long time, regulatory modalities of punishing people that polluted the environment, building costs into corporates, you pay for what they're paying for your sins, which is now evolving more. In fact, the regulations themselves are becoming far more, what shall I say, anticipatory of changes that are about to happen. So, regulations themselves are becoming more far-sighted in terms of making impacts over time rather than immediately. And the other part is policy. How does policy actually promote or incentivize to enable the environment to change towards sustaining development and sustaining growth? So for me, Amit, to put it succinctly, one is the change in the regulatory framework, the outlook towards regulation, and the other is the policy framework where you try and incentivize for the years to come.
So, Dr. Chatterjee, what we are saying here is that there has to be a lot of synergy between what the corporations are doing and what the government is actually looking at. But typically it is seen that there could be a lag that actually does happen. How do you overcome that? Because that's going to be one challenge in the world tomorrow, because the world is going to move much faster. So that's where the question is going to be.
Yeah. So one is active dialogue, active interaction. Try to be proactive in terms of the thinking. The corporates have got to also understand government's ways of thinking. Government has to anticipate the corporate way of thinking. So a lot of active dialogue, a lot of hard work by chambers of commerce and industry, a lot of hard work by institutions like mine, the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, which interacts very actively with the corporate world and carries the very strong messages to government so that there are policy changes.
They're quite interesting. So let me come to Siva here. Siva, you're actually running a very interesting enterprise, which can be categorized as bottom of the pyramid enterprise. You have created huge impact. And how do you really look at this whole idea of sustainability and tomorrow's businesses? Because we are talking about capitalism, which is going to be different. There is a lot of disparity that does happen. So you are actually solving a lot of challenges in the world.
Yeah, thanks. It feels nice that we are doing something like this, but you've always been generous on this. Having said that, I think a couple of issues which Professor really touched upon was what he referred to in the bottom of the pyramid. Also used words like constantly, the right language he used was those who are almost always exploited and underserved. Now for me, some of these are really large issues. We don't realize the extent of exploitation which is happening on a daily basis, and this exploitation is not necessarily usurious but on a everyday basis. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes now because it's fascinating from that whole quadrant that he showed. Let me take the case of Bombay. If you look at Bombay, the milk distribution is amongst the toughest. It's crazy. There is no control on MRP. There's really no control on MRP. MRP is our maximum retail price. So in my view, the whole city of Bombay is being constantly exploited, if I can use that word. That's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, you'll be shocked if you go to any of the, so to speak, slums, where milk is sold even today by the ladle. 2 ladles, 3 ladles, 4 ladles, and if you calculate, it's coming to about 65, 70 rupees to the litre. So here on the one hand, you are having people who are paying, if its price is 38, going up to 42, 44, depending on when you want the service. People are there to pay, they're paying, that's fine. On the other end, so if you look at this context, we guys are doing some some interesting work. I don't know when it will work out. It's part of that whole issue of what can you do differently. We're trying to put together some technology in terms of load cells, some amount of low temperature cleaning solutions from various companies, putting together GPRS enabled devices to actually see how can I create milk with no packaging. Why do you need to pack? Only when you pack you have a problem. So you provide it without it. Now, it's not easy. We've been at it for the last 2 years. We think we've got some solution. We're actually looking at an ATM, anytime milk, in every single large place where there people can congregate. We fill it up in the nights. You guys take it right through the day. And we'll ensure that there's enough technology there to take care of it. Where I'm coming from is, I'm just giving you one strange example to just give you a thought process of, we started it with the view that we will do it for avoiding plastics. That's where we started. But then when we went around to figure out that there's so much exploitation, what can we do? And there's a hell of a lot of money in it. Huh? So therefore our view is, there is corporate possibility, there is money if you really attack it. And there's large turnovers, really large turnovers. You're talking of almost $1 billion and a half market that we are talking of in one city. So there is an opportunity. Sorry, I took a long time, but I just thought what some of the issues which he brought up were really fascinating.
I think the point you make is so important, because the initial instinct, of course, by companies was to make smaller packages, right? I mean, the sachet revolution. But I think we're outgrowing that, right? And realizing, first of all, that we've known this for a long time, that produces actually higher per unit prices because the packaging is that much more complicated, even if it's smaller. But that the real solution is no packaging, right? I mean, it's really going back to basics. That's the clean tech solution, and it's also the cheaper solution simultaneously.
So in fact, quite interestingly, when you're saying that you're going to reverse the sachet revolution or what, so are we really saying that we'll go back to the 1950s when you were actually buying things in the open? Or are we really talking about something else?
It's like a vending machine you're talking about.
Yeah, I am talking vending.
Yeah.
We already run one of the largest vending machine systems in the world, but though of course it's a little old technology, so we're trying to see what to do with it. But it's sometimes when you look at what we are, I'll take off at a little bit of a tangent on this issue because I'm a little very fascinated by this whole issue. We look at quite a lot of sustainability using the GRI framework, whether it's 3, 4, what have you. Many of those issues really doesn't talk of some of the technology aspects in the real sense. So it's talking more from what will you do next year, what do you do the year after, do you have a policy, is it there, not there. So maybe some areas of improvement is really called for in the GRI framework if you want to really make things move the needle drastically. Having said that, my concern here is, as long as it is really in the purpose of the organization, it will work. If it's not in the purpose of the organization, the rest of it will all be a little bit of nice talking, it'll happen, we're there for it, so we've got some stuff, but it is really not the core of the organization. And if it is not in the purpose, it doesn't work. I mean, that's my only thought.
Great, Siva. So Amitabh, I have to come to you. You're running a very interesting, or you've started a very interesting project in Bihar, in Bhagalpur, and you're trying to work with artisans and things. And what are the challenges you face there? And when you talk about sustainability, when you talk about business models, when you talk about base of the pyramid here, how do you really resolve that problem in a place like Bihar, or in a low resource setting? How do you create a business model which is going to be effective?
We aren't facing any challenges, to be honest. I mean, the challenges are just like any other business would be. I mean, our setup is little more than a thought and little less than a business yet. So we are not yet a business. What we are doing is, as you said, artisans. Bhagalpur is known as Silk City, but there are no geographical demarcations. You can't go and see silk there. So you see it like any other town in India. You go there. What we're doing is we turned to a professor and we wanted to coin a term for us, and he said it's bob for top. It's bottom of pyramid for top of pyramid. So the idea is, okay, these are bottom of pyramid people who get less than $2 a day, but they have a skill that can clothe you. They are also doing biomimicry, if you will, because they rear silk and
Traditional technology.
So we have a quarterly graduate advising us on fiber. So the idea is, okay, silk has been the most luxurious product in society, like seed. And yet they are getting $2 a day. So how do we increase the value of that product? And how do we share that value?
So what are you looking at doing differently to share that value? Because what you're saying
Sharing
is
easy.
bob for top would be that there could be an exploitation.
Sharing is the easy part. Because you have a legal framework, you are not greedy, you create a business of a couple of $1 million and you distribute the profit that comes to you. The sharing bit is not that difficult. You have ombudsman, you create a trust, and the sharing bit is easy. Increasing bit is the more difficult, right? Whereas you ask questions like, okay, why is that? As you know, I live in Frankfurt and travel around a bit. There's a small village in Italy that I was talking to you about, where they have a company called Brunelli, and their scarves sell for 600, 700 euros. And I just asked myself why. Simple question. I'm not saying this scarf should sell at 600. Just ask this question, and there is merit in it. They should sell at 600 euros. But I just want to sell at 100 euros. That's it. And I'm asking, how do I do it? That is the challenge that we are facing.
It's called marketing.
It's called marketing, exactly. And despite being having been to business school, I'm still, and on top of it, in Paris, so it was a bit, yeah. That's the challenge you're facing. And you've seen that place. You travel there, you see it, So you know what kind of bottom pyramid we're talking about.
For me, it was absolutely looking at poverty stark in the face and whatever. So it was a stunning experience. But Raghu, I have to come to you on this. Like when you think as a finance professor, you've been doing a lot of work in terms of understanding investment behavior and how people look at things, risk behavior and so on and so forth. How do you talk about sustainability, risk behavior, ethics in the world of tomorrow?
And that's an interesting question. Let me change that a little bit. When we're talking about investors, one of the interesting things which we didn't discuss at all today, not in your presentation, was who's going to pay for this, right? So we've talked a lot about these are things that companies can do, but at the end of the day, you have to raise money in order to invest in any of these technologies. Now, one of the problems we have, one of the things we know at least, is that there's a negative relationship between the level of financial development of a country and the rate of growth in that country, GDP growth. The more banks there are, the worse the country does. Now, why is that? One of the obvious reasons is obviously that the banks pay so much more, the smartest people go to the banks rather than working in sustainable technology or other things like that. But there's another reason. If you ask a bank for money to say, I want to invest in this particular type of technology, what's the bank going to look for? It's going to look for something tangible, something with collateral, right? So you're going to say, okay, this is a physical product, so if you default on your loan, I can take it back, and I can therefore get some money back on my loan. Now, unfortunately, if you're talking about cutting-edge products, products which are basically ideas, that's not going to be financed by most banks. You need alternative sources. One of the things we are developing at the University of Cambridge, I'm the director of something called the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. Alternative means it's sort of like a buzzword, almost like sustainable finance. Very few professors will end up telling people, "Oh, I specialize in unsustainable finance. All finance is sustainable." But anyway, what does alternative finance mean? What it means is anything which doesn't go through banks. So basically, individuals directly financing technologies or other investment opportunities without going through a financial intermediary. And that's actually taking off quite dramatically in the world as well. So in the UK, we just launched the UK benchmarking report on alternative finance, and we did a similar one in Europe 2 weeks ago. And what we find is, in the UK alone, there are about 60 to 65 crowdsourcing platforms. So now what you have is individuals being plugged together on a crowdsourcing platform, and they are lending money directly to companies on the other side to invest in opportunities like this. Some of these guys, the whole point about this is there's no certification mechanism. There's no intermediary in the middle saying, you're going to get your money back if you invest in this. There's no credit rating agency involved. You're going in there and you're saying, I think this is good, and I'm going to invest in this particular opportunity. In many cases, you don't get your money back. In many cases, you do. So the question is, what makes people decide that this particular business is a good business or a bad business? And one of the things we found is sustainability. The word sustainability is actually a good word to have. Even if the business is not sustainable, people feel good about the idea or giving money to something like this. So, but you would never get that through a bank. You go to a bank, you will never get the money for that unless it's backed down by some hard unit. But so in some cases, what will happen, what I'm seeing happening, is that as crowdsourcing and peer-to-peer lending and all these things move more mainstream, you're finding more and more opportunities where this kind of behavior can actually be a sustainable form of business. In other words, people are willing to pay for these investment opportunities to be actually undertaken.
So this is interesting, and we have Wilfred who's actually twitching here to say something. Yes, Wilfred, you have
I think first, the negative correlation is not a surprise if we look at the kind of entertainment that the banks have provided. If you look at HSBC and the great financial crisis, I think more than entertainment. But I think there's also a difference between various countries. If you look at financing mechanisms in Germany, we have Volksbanken and Sparkasse, which are basically like CASA-based banks. And they are specialized on providing lending to smaller entrepreneurs. And that is actually driving the SME system in Germany. The SME system in Germany is important because a lot of the innovation, green and otherwise, comes out of that particular segment. And they typically tend to be 4 to 5 times more efficient in innovating than, say, Mercedes-Benz or any of the big companies. What is lacking in the UK is also this particular type of bank, which actually has gone away as a function of time, if I understand correctly. So I think that's probably an opportunity to look at various models in various countries and try to leverage what actually works in other geographies. That's one thing. The second thing that I feel one needs to look at, and I'm not sure if this is fully in the framework, is business models also. Business model innovation has a tremendous opportunity for green or sustainable development. If you look at a car-to-go model, where you don't own the car anymore, you just buy mobility, that replaces 9 owned cars. So suddenly, instead of having a vehicle penetration of about 900 per thousand in the say in the US of 800 in Germany, you'll come down dramatically with obviously consequences for employment and taxes and all that. But business models in themselves have a tremendous potential to improve or to reduce impact.
What I'm hearing you say is that there is going to be a dramatic shift in business models, delivery models that we're actually looking at here. But do you think that they might actually be applicable in a low resource setting like India? So what you're talking about is say car sharing or mobility solution or whatever. In the Indian context, how applicable will that be?
No, again, if you look at India and you look at Party Gather, right, here basically driven by the fact that I had about 27 areas to cover with my network, I didn't have the money to do it, I came up with a new model that is actually a cash conserving model, a risk sharing model to do business. I think in economies such as India, due to the specific constraints that we have, we should be even more capable of coming up with alternative business models. Another example is if you look at HUL and the Shakti Hours. Started as you know, as a corporate social responsibility activity, today is de facto a distribution channel that's as profitable as their normal distribution channel. So basically what you do is you take a constraint and turn it into a real competitive advantage.
Very, very interesting. So Rizio, I have to come to you here. You do something very interesting, look at the 5 elements, and you try to look at businesses and so on and so forth. Like, how do you look at sustainability and talking about the 5 elements and the way we look at the Indian political philosophy and so on and so forth?
Okay, Amit. I think I would like to actually connect all these things. I want to actually look at innovation, community, packaging, these different issues that we're talking about through the eyes of the individual innovator. So let us think about the individual innovator. When we're talking about the sachet culture. The other day I was on a panel with a management person who was talking about this particular question of shampoo sachets in Indian market. So he said, this was a moment of innovation when this sachet came into thing. Because you're talking about a lifestyle aspiration for a huge population that we're talking about, where they want to have the silky hair at least weekly, but they cannot afford this thing. How do you give it to them? How do you make this lifestyle accessible to them? That was the moment of innovation. But then I asked him, like, the moment this innovation came, there was also this packaging which came, which is, in this 1 rupee package, you cannot bring the whole lifestyle etiquette. You can only give this product. You cannot bring the whole habits. You cannot change the habits with this package. So you do not have an environment for this. You do not have a waste management environment. In India, where on the either side of the road you have this, and then everything is on the road, and cattle are on the road. They are eating and they are dying every day. So in this kind of a context, what is missing? What is the appreciation that we are missing? This innovator is missing. My organization is called Leela, which is play, but it is also called the luminous idea of life appreciation, Lila. So for us, appreciation is very important. When I would like to respond to Stuart and the various stages that he talked about in terms of an individual, like how do you really connect? How do you begin to appreciate? I think we begin to appreciate with our body. Like, when we are all having this conversation over breakfast in the morning, how many of us actually noticed the taste of anything that we ate? We were all in conversation. No, we were all talking about business.
Well, actually, I did.
No. A few of us did. I'm talking about what was our general focus? Did we notice there were absolutely good food, various? I got a hash brown which was too brown. Did I notice this? Did I notice the aroma of coffee? There are day-to-day things which we miss. So if you fail to appreciate that, then we will surely fail to appreciate the context of innovation. And we will surely fail to be relevant to the context. In a place like India, when we are making an innovation, we have to be relevant. I would like to close with this one understanding of relevance, which the philosopher Derrida brings to us. He has got an essay called What is a Relevant Translation? He's talking about translation. We are also talking about translating a certain innovation to a particular context, bringing it to a certain kind of context. He's writing in French, so he's talking about this particular play by Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice, which is very, very important here. The scene is very, very curious. Like Act 4, Scene 1 of Merchant of Venice, where Shylock is there. Portia is disguised as the lawyer, and Antonio is there. So Portia is saying, telling Shailen, please have mercy. And Antonio, Shailen says, no, this is justice. I have to have my justice. Then Portia says something very important. She said, mercy seasons justice. And then Derrida takes this word season and he translates the French word he uses is relever. I don't know whether this is the correct pronunciation. It is R-E-L-E-V.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. A two-part question. The first is, if we go back to your quadrants and we forget the nomenclature around base of the pyramid, and we say, it's a movement towards green and beyond green is where you started. If we look at the global scenario, are there certain industries that are moving faster towards beyond green? And if they are, which are they? And what reasons would you ascribe towards this movement from one of regulation to one of, almost enlightened movement towards beyond green? Is it a business imperative? Is it a policy imperative? Is it a regulatory imperative? What is it? What is driving this change? And where is it happening?
Those are big questions. And, I can offer up a point of view, but I would encourage my colleagues also to weigh in. The way I think about which industry, first of all, industry definition I think is shifting, right? So we can ascribe to kind of old industry categories, but part of what's happening is that industry boundaries are being dissolved. But the way I would think about it at some level is that the industries that are moving quickest are the ones that have the already lightest footprint, right? In other words, that would tend to be more asset light, and that might have shorter lived assets, and that wouldn't be as invested in the technologies of the past. So they wouldn't be heavily reliant on fossil fuels, for example, or could easily shift, not easily, but more adaptively shift out more quickly. So those industries that have huge capital, investments that are with long-lived assets that are dependent upon, the fuels and technologies of the past, probably are the ones that are slowest to change. And that wouldn't come as a great surprise to us. Now, there's variation even within industries, though, right? There are some that can see the handwriting on the wall more quickly than others, and you'd expect that. That's why competition is good, right? As far as why is it happening now? Wow, again, I think there's so many dynamics that are conspiring to say that the time is now. But try this one on for size and see what you think. I think it has a lot to do with the realization that there's sort of two driving forces happening at the same time. One is that sort of environmentally, just from a natural capital point of view, in many of the industries that are moving first, which tend to be those that depend on life, right, in various forms, that if we don't change our ways in a pretty fundamental way, we simply, those companies just will not, they'll cease to exist. And that's in basic stuff like food and water, things that we sort of need, right? That it's becoming apparent that if we don't shift our ways, there's not going to be any fish in the ocean. We'll erode away all of our soils. That it's become kind of painfully clear that that's the case. And I think large companies in particular that have global footprints see that, right? Have seen that increasingly over the last decade, and they're starting to do something about it because it's been very difficult for international collaboration and cooperation to occur because these problems cross boundaries. They don't respect national boundaries. They cross boundaries. They're transboundary problems more often than not. So we've not really been able to attend to them very effectively through public policy, in my view. And so some companies have stepped up to the challenge to really begin to get a grip on this. Marine Stewardship Council with Unilever being a prime example of that, right? Just as one example. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is the realization that, again, for larger companies, that they may have been able to meet their growth objectives just serving rich people in the past. And then, the emerging market was the rising middle class for the last 20 years. That, you're sort of running out of, that whole approach is running out of gas. That if you're going to keep growing, and for the moment, that still is what drives the capitalist system, right, is growth, then you have to reach a new customer base. You have to, there has to be a new market that you create in order to keep growing. And all that's left really are the other 4 billion people. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot. We're creating new rich people, but not enough to drive global growth. I mean, we're concentrating assets, but Warren Buffett's not going to. He's going to buy more stuff than us, but not 70 billion times more.
Great, Stuart. So, Wilfred, 10 seconds. One remark that you would like to make in terms of what is the takeaway?
No, I think both are important. It's definitely entrepreneurship, but at the same time, it has to be enlightened regulation as well. There are some technologies that need to be driven by governments. There are also sometimes companies that need guidance. If I look at the U.S. car industry, for example, they've been lobbying against reasonable emission laws for the longest time till the great financial crisis, that they had to fight out two of them. Right? So I think it's both. It's entrepreneurship, it's definitely the need for growth, and I do believe that government has a role to play.
Sure. Dr. Chatterjee.
Enlightened regulation, proactive policy, and great initiative from the world of the entrepreneur.
Great.
Well, I think we've been pretty sustainable already. We're talking about one.
Sure. So, okay, Siva, any 2 points?
No, for me, given the fact that specifically living in India, for me the whole issue of nutrition is going to really hit us hard. It's a cosmic concern.
Okay.
There's a huge underserved market.
And Vizir, half a minute.
No, I just would give this term, like, I think we need to think about an organic business governance connective in order to bridge these gaps that we're talking about. Even within the sustainability thinkers, like there are gaps and hierarchies. So I think there has to be a very organic business governance connective that we need.
So great. So I think there's a workshop that's happening in exactly 20 minutes with Stuart, so you can stay back and I'm sure you're going to enjoy that as well. So thanks a lot for being on the panel. Thanks a lot for being such great guests here today. The tea is being served outside. We'll be back in this room in 20 minutes, but a small token of appreciation from our side. Neera, could you just Stu?
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stuart.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So could we just have a really... Thanks a lot for joining us today. Enjoy the tea and we'll come back in 20 minutes, please. Thank you.
Great.